Hello, everybody. Welcome to the NEWSPASTE Podcast with me, your host, Johnny Vedmore. And I'm looking forward to it. I mean, we always have a little, me and whichever guest coming on, we always have a little chat before we actually come on. And, I'm smiling, he's smiling. It looks like we're going to have a good conversation. We're really on the same page in loads of different ways. And this is fearless. This is, I would never have met this man here unless we had both been targeted within censorship, really just focused, targeted, and in a way which was, it was almost ridiculous. It was almost a creme de la creme ridiculous. We'll talk about this, but this is Etienne de la Boetie squared. You got to add the 2 to the end because otherwise in a search engine you're going to find a philosopher probably with a beard. Did the original Etienne de la Boetie without the square, did he have a beard?
He had a mustache.
Oh, right, okay. Then I'm not interested if he had a mustache. So explain a little bit about, because you're obviously, we see up there the Art of Liberty Foundation. You know, you obviously on the libertarian strand of politics. I don't know which part of that you were in, and it's big, complicated. Weird in places, really weird in other places, funny and amusing and more free. And I consider myself a libertarian just because I just want people to stop, suppressing. So tell people, what is your, first of all, where are you from and what is your political journey that got you to where you are now?
So I'm a misplaced Texan. And so I'm from Texas here in the United States. My nom de plume is that of a 16th century French political philosopher. The original Etienne de la Boetie was really the first person to expose the tricks and techniques that rulers used, not just to get obedience, but to get fealty and adoration. I am a libertarian, which is kind of like the umbrella term for, pro-freedom, pro-liberty, pro-free market political philosophies in the world, but really I'm a voluntarist, and a voluntarist is someone that does not believe in the legitimacy, the necessity, or the desirability of having a government. And in my book, the book I'm most known for, Government, the Biggest Scam in History Exposed, I make the case that government is not only always illegitimate. You can never have a legitimate government for a variety of reasons. You can't delegate a right that you don't have yourself to a representative or to a government to represent you doing something you don't have the ability to do yourself. So if I don't have the ability to take Johnny's money and redistribute it, or I don't have the rules if I don't have the ability myself to make up rules for Johnny, then I can't delegate it to a representative to do something that I don't have the right to do myself. And so if I can't, you can't be bound by a social contract you didn't sign. And if my lovely fiance and myself can't vote to rob Johnny because there's 2 of us and 1 of Johnny, well, it doesn't matter if there's 3 of us or 10 of us or 300 million of us. There's no magical additional person that makes something immoral and illogical now moral and logical. So government has been the biggest scam in all of human history. And so it goes back to monarchy. The monarchs were the original government, and I think once the divine right of kings wasn't playing in Peoria anymore, they tricked the population into democracy, thinking that giving the population the idea that they're somehow have a say in how they're being ruled. But the reality is they're always the rulers are always going to be able to fudge the ballot box and engineer the outcome because they have a disparity in campaign funds. They control the media. The subtitle of Government, the Biggest Scam in History Exposed is how intergenerational organized crime runs the government, the media, and academia. And my thesis, which gets to your intro on the censorship, is the number one weapon of the rulers is controlling the information that society receives. And so, not to give away the book, but it's the banks at the top. The banks are creating money out of thin air using a technique called fractional reserve banking. They're buying up the world with little digital dollars and little fiat paper tickets they create, and they're taking those fiat paper tickets and digital dollars, and they've bought up and monopolized the media into a small handful of corporations operating as a cartel. And so they're every single channel you're going to see government is legitimate, government is legitimate, government is legitimate. In the United States, we're notorious for making the government the hero in all of the movies and all of the television shows. So it's going to be the FBI agent or the CIA agent saving the world from the dastardly terrorists, or the president of the United States.
What a bunch of bastards. Go on.
Thank God for the government, man. Obviously, like every single movie, if it wasn't for
Ryan bloody Reynolds, I mean,
man. I mean, there would be nukes going off in every city if it wasn't for the government saving the day at the last minute.
Yeah, I know.
So that's how they get away with it. And then on the academia side, you go to the monopoly government school, the mandatory school, where they force you to learn. They teach you before you're old enough to really, question the morality and the logic yourself. They're going to teach you that government is legitimate, desirable, and necessary when you're a child, and then they're going to slip it to you as a religion. And so that's kind of what my new book, To See the Cage is to Leave It, is about. It's called, the subtitle is 25 Techniques the Few Use to Control the Many. But they're using all of the techniques of an unethically manipulative religion or a cult on the population surreptitiously. So
you must know John Krycek's work as well.
Oh, that name is so familiar.
Oh, I will send you a load of his stuff later. He did a School World Order was one of his books. But he is. I think you two should connect. I can't even imagine a better conversation. I can't even imagine a better conversation. I'm surprised we only coming across each other for the first time. I got a couple of questions from hearing that. I got a couple.
Well, I get censored a lot.
Yeah, so, I know. Well, join the club, man.
I can't believe I've never heard of you. And I'm like,
dude, we're in the same club. We're in the. They really, really don't like people who just say. If you're saying everything, truth, all the truth all the time, you're hitting buttons all the time. You don't hit not every button, not everything you hit is it meant to be a button or is a button. But often we don't know that that's case. It just happens that we keep saying, we keep writing, we keep speaking, and then at some point, boom, you realize 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, that's the button, and you I mean, for me, I already knew that our joint foe, you could say, or our foe that we have in common, is a lady who we've both talked about, and we'll get to that. But one of my first questions was, were you a punk or were you metal in school?
I was a punk. I was a skater.
Yeah. I recognize my own. I recognize my own.
Yeah. I came up on a skateboard.
Yeah. Me too, man. I loved it. I got arthritis in my big toes now, so it's a bit sad because but I can recognize a punk skater anytime. I was right in that scene. I'm in a punk band and everything. Loved it.
I was listening to a little Black Flag last night, and the Sex Pistols are still on the rotation.
Yeah, I can sense that. So, when did you start doing like more? Because you there's a lot of content. I've been going through some of your content. You got a lot of content. You're talking about all of the things that need to be talked about. Not just this is one of the problems I have with a lot of people on the independent media is that they clearly are heavily focused on just one topic of interest, just one, and that seems to me a little bit of a red flag to say, that they're controlling one topic and that's what they're meant to do. I mean, it looks like that because most people if they're triggered to want to write, are triggered by multiple things. And I find that in your stuff. So when did you start actually talking out loud? Because I get a feeling you were already like me, sitting around in your teenage years, putting the world to rights. But like, when did that change?
So I think I wrote my book, the first edition of Government, the Biggest Scam in History, around 2017 for like a small group of people. I put out like 50. I actually wrote it for my kids. My kids were in the government school system at the time, and I was watching the government school system run these unethically manipulative techniques on my kids that I break down in the book. And so I wrote the book originally just, because my kids were in this system, I wanted them to understand what these techniques were. And then I printed 50 copies for 50 influential people in the Liberty movement. It was very, very well received. And so then I turned it, into a book, and then I have refined it and, like it's on its 5th edition right now. It's been the best-selling book at over 24 Liberty conferences and events. And then the new book, so that was in like 2017. And then I really kind of went full steam, like right before I'd started going full steam right before the COVID. And then one of the things I was known for at the COVID was we really were at the forefront of leading the resistance to the COVID. We realized it was a scam. I realized it was a scam very early on, and began organizing resistance in Santa Cruz, California, with a gentleman by the name of David Rodriguez. And we started out with like less than a dozen people, and a month later we had 400 people on a Facebook group, and we were marching through the streets, distributing flyers. We were going into hospitals, exposing empty hospitals, empty waiting rooms, talking to people in the hospital that said the whole thing was a scam. And so
they pulled my heartstrings good, really. I'm lucky enough to be in the same strain of journalism and the world as you clearly are. So I was also working for Unlimited Hangout then. So but from about I wrote the first Youngcomen article in 2019, and by mid 2020 I was working for Unlimited Hangout, and by late 2020 I was living with Whitney in Chile. And then we had like we come back here and had baby eventually. And all through that time was all COVID. And when it first hit, I felt like, oh, what if it is true and people are dying and the hospitals are full? I feel like I should actually volunteer, go to the hospitals and help out. And I tried that. And no one got back to me at all. And I was like, nah, that's not right. And I live right next to a hospital. I saw the empty streets. I saw there was no one in there. I was walking around the hospital that's right across the road from me, all the way around, checking it out, seeing if there's no one around. It was clear to me there was a bit of a scam going on straight away. So I had all of that extra as well, because I also research Big Pharma and those things. So I had that luck, and I found there was hardly anybody around. How easy was it over there? How hard was it to actually organize the troops as you've done?
So we had a blast. I gotta tell you. So we went into the hospital at the epicenter of COVID in California, in Santa Clara, which the LA Times said was the epicenter of COVID in California. And when I say there's nothing going on, I mean there was like tumbleweeds. Yeah. And if you know anything about the United States and how many Chinese Americans go back and forth from Silicon Valley to to China, if there was a COVID, if there was really a rapidly spreading epidemic, then Silicon Valley would have been the epicenter of it in California. And when I say that there was tumbleweeds, there was tumbleweeds. And so I put on a mask for about 17 times that I put on a mask during the entire time. And I went into, where they're doing the testing, and I take the mask off, and And the guy is like, he's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, I'm an investigative journalist, and we're trying to figure out if there's a pandemic going on here. And he looks like his hands caught in the cookie jar, but he was honest. It's like, no, there's like, we're not, I mean, he's like flat out, we're not seeing any pandemic conditions. We're not seeing any excess deaths, just usual and, customary elderly deaths. He's like, we're not even testing that many people. He's like, this was a Sunday that we went in there, and Saturday would have been busiest day. They had 8 people that came in just to get tested, and he just flew. And like I walked out of that, and this isn't a tent, so they'd set up the tents and everything like that, the overflow tents, and like there's just a bunch of people in moon suits pretending like there's a pandemic going on, and like after talking to that guy, and this was in March. I walked out and I'm like, this is the fakest thing. Like, there is no way, if this was a real pandemic, that this hospital would not have been full. And so anyway, I just knew after walking out of that conversation that the whole thing was as fake as could be.
Did you have a similar experience over in Texas or in America in general, where with us, they did put do not resuscitate on elderly care home patients? Is basically no one should be resuscitated if they go into any trauma, and that of course boosts up the number of deaths that happened around that time. Did you have any of that going on? Really, really super dirty tricks?
I don't remember when we discovered that it was the protocols that were doing the damage. It was sometime in kind of mid to late 2020, I think, is when we realized it was how they were doing it with the protocols and the ventilators and the loneliness and the isolation and the throwing elderly off of their schedules and the remdesivir and everything else. I'll tell you what I did, though. I was in 20 states in 2020 organizing resistance. I was in 30 states in 2021, and we were talking to I was running something called the Thick Red Line Project, where we were trying to stand down the cops so that they would not enforce the lockdowns, which I viewed as economic warfare against the population. And so we're trying to stand down the police, and we would invariably be brought in by a community group. Mostly it was conservatives. It was generally the Republican, like the conservatives or the Republicans or the patriots of the town, whatever. They were always the cool kids, like, that aren't going along with it and everything like that. And so a lot of times they had a relationship with the sheriff, and they would have these resistance groups, and the resistance group might be 20 people, the resistance group might be 100 people, the resistance group might be 500 plus people. And in that resistance group, there would be doctors and nurses, and I talked to dozens and dozens and dozens of people in 20 plus states in 2020, and in 30 plus states and 31, probably more than anybody else in the country. And then also calling my own personal network of friends that were either emergency room doctors or regular doctors or nurses or EMTs or whatever. And I found one person that actually claimed that they had pandemic conditions, and she was a hospital administrator, and I didn't believe her. And I think she was but anyway, I talked to hundreds of people that were in the medical profession over that time, and nobody claimed that they were experiencing pandemic conditions. We would drive up to the hospital just to talk to the paramedics that were outside and just say, hey man, we're just doing a survey, as we went town to town to town and for doing these resistance activities. And the EMTs would shake yeah, we're not really doing anything, or I think the whole thing's a scam, or we would get, all these different comments where I was never able to find a single hospital where an employee actually claimed that they had pandemic conditions, besides this one woman who I ran into at a park.
Oh, wow. Well, the park lady. Okay, we're going to talk about park ladies here, because I had the same experience in that sense. I had I live right underneath a hospital, and the majority of people who live in my community are either nurses, doctors, they're at hospital admin or their managers in the NHS. Like the entirety of the outskirts of the hospital is just that. Student nurses. It's a university hospital, of Wales. So it has a really massive amount of students in there as well. So everybody, absolutely everybody around here is, and the majority of is working in the hospital, but the majority of them didn't want to have the conversation during COVID. They did not want to. It's even now, a lot of the people who work in the hospital, they're reticent. They talk to me sometimes whispering in the park about their experiences, but they don't. Their whole manner and tone is that of someone who does not want to confront properly and is ready for it to happen again as well, and it to be enforced again on another occasion, and will repeat the same thing because they were in the middle of it and they realized, oh, there is something wrong here, but we are here to try and help people. So, that's basically the thing that evil people use every single time, is this feeling that you want to aid your fellow man in some way. They tug on your heartstrings and then they kill your fellow man, which is usually what they do. There was one lady in a park. I like her. She's a nice woman. She's a nice woman. She was I can't remember what you call it. It's like a temporary doctor, a locum. She was like a locum. She in the hospital, temporary doctor of some sort. And she was really calm, lovely lady, had a lovely, beautiful golden retriever, absolutely lovely dog, Mila. Walks off the lead like my dog, but that's really rare for her, big golden, gorgeous. So I always like speaking with her. And during COVID, we talked, and I didn't believe what she said to me. I didn't believe I was in the part, but she was quoting stats that I know had jiggery pokery. There was things going on with those stats. They were represented in a certain way, but didn't take into account certain things, left certain things out. And she didn't, I felt like when she was telling me, she didn't feel like it was true as well. And she was just in a state of like hyper-normalization where she's got to say what everybody else who's around her all the time believes. And she's in the mantra mode, they're just repeating the words. And I remember the people listening to us talk and looking shocked and worried. And some people didn't properly communicate with me afterwards because I talked about it openly and said I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it. I'm looking around and saying there's no one going into that hospital. I'm saying it's right across the way from me. It's just not happening. But there was another lady as well who was talking about the tests. She was talking about the lateral flow test. And it's like, once something is a virus or an infection or whatever is within a virus is within a body of people, after a certain amount of time, everybody's had the illness and the illness mutates. That's the idea of it. And then if you have lateral flow tests after it's already endemic in any national population, it's no better than 50-50. It's no better than chance. It doesn't actually give you. But they say they got this mantra, 96.6% accurate. 96.6% accurate. If, in context, it's not a pandemic or an epidemic. It's not in that situation. And they were using these tests in ways where you could see how they were tricked. And I was having conversations with them, and I realized through COVID, there was some battles within my own community I just couldn't have. It would just cause rifts, anger. In another situation, it might be useful not to have those people completely wanting to tear me apart because of any belief they think I have. It was a very hard. Did you say you traveled around and you did a lot, or you at least were very proactive? What about your base? Did your friendship group have the same views as you on it?
So no, well, it was mixed. So among my libertarian voluntarist friends, a almost all of them understood that it was a scam, that it wasn't it wasn't what we were being told. And so kind of among that group, yes, among my family and among my kind of non-political, not really paying attention, getting your news from the television, they were falling for it. And it caused all kinds of personal issues in my life. My family, I think some of my family eventually came around. I think they know that, they may not want to admit it, but like I have a feeling that they understand that the whole thing was a scam, and nobody likes to get scammed and nobody likes to get tricked. And so, I think a lot of people are having a hard time in dealing with and accepting that they got scammed and they got tricked.
Ego
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah, and they made decisions that might have hurt their loved ones. And so, like, I think that that's a really, really big psychological issue with a lot of people, is that they made decisions that may have hurt their loved ones. And I don't think, I got to tell you, the thing with, like vaccination, I've been an vaccination advocate. And once a mom makes the decision to stick that needle into the arm, they're never going to admit that needle was dangerous. They're never going to admit that they've hurt their child. They're never going to admit that, something happened. And so I think that there's a version of that with the COVID. And so, once, like you're not going to admit that you made decisions that hurt your loved ones. You're not going to admit that you made decisions that hurt your child. There's a huge cognitive dissonance there. And I think that's the thing that kept COVID going on as long as it did, is that people didn't want to admit they got tricked, didn't want to, because every single person that fell for it had a friend like Etienne or Johnny that was trying to tell them what was going on, trying to tell them it was a scam, and they just wouldn't listen. And so I think that dynamic, I think that dynamic is, was very prevalent during those times.
Yeah, most definitely. I know a lot. It's some people. I'm lucky. My my closest friend is not easy to trick. I say it's probably why I like him. He knows what is or what isn't. You don't have to run it. He was actually on top of it before me. I was like, the first day when I thought I had to mask up, I thought about it and I just went too far. I just went like all of the way. And then like he said to me, no, that's, what is, you'd have to have gas masks. It's not going to work. So what's the point of wearing a mask? There's no point. If it's ineffective anyway, what's the point? So go and do a bit of research. And I went and looked and did a little, digging around, and found out it was those masks with filters on, which were like 150 quid, with the closest thing you could get, where you have to change your filters all of the time. It's like, what the fuck? Right, so if you're going to get ill, you're going to get ill. If they're going to release something, they're going to release something, and that's going to happen. That's going to happen. The whole thing was kind of like set up to go. They knew the dynamics, and what you're talking about as well is that these little sort of like, if you were playing a role play game and you were looking at the consequences of your two decisions that you make, there's going to be loads of little details that later on will make people understand that this was all a bit of a, they know the outcome already. They know the outcome of complex games. So off COVID, I mean, COVID has passed now. What's your main focus on investigation?
So after the two books, the thing I'm best known for is a monograph. I intended to turn it into a book. I was actually working on kind of the 5th edition of Government, the Biggest Scam in History, and I was going to try and incorporate, breakdown of the scam of the COVID. And then that investigation just took on a life of its own. I thought it was going to take me a couple of weeks to do. It ended up taking 6 months. and I released it as a monograph that you can find at artofliberty.substack.com. But the investigation that came out of that was entitled "Solving COVID: The COVID-19 Eugenics Vaccine Drug Scam Timeline." And in this investigation, I take the COVID back to I don't start the timeline at when COVID was declared.
Lovely.
I start the timeline at the founding of the eugenics movement, which a lot of people aren't familiar with, but it was very fashionable in the early 20th century.
Oh, my friend.
Among all of the industrialists and robber barons and crony capitalists.
I cannot believe the conversations we're going to have. I cannot believe it. My first, the place that I was drawn to was late 1800s, early 1900s, to a guy actually, I tried to focus on the British aspect of it, and a guy called Reginald Farrar, who set up one of the first international symposiums in China on viruses and vaccines, and all of the vaccine manufacturers came round during the Manchurian plagues of the plague in Manchuria in 1910, 1911, just before the Japanese took over China as well in that year, and everything changed. And then Kitasato Shibasaburo was the guy who wanted to see how to like use with trapping in villages of Chinese people and infecting them with plague or with illness, and watching if they tried to get out, they would be killed, watching how their societies work. So such an interesting, like, history is everything. So where did you start? What led you back first? I know what led me back, but what led you back to going back to that part of time?
So what they called the Spanish flu, a lot of people don't realize this, but that started on an American Army base, part of Fort Riley, Kansas, called Camp Funston. And at Camp Funston, the Rockefeller Medical Foundation was doing injections allegedly for meningitis, but literally the son of John D. Rockefeller's right-hand man, William Gates, is running an injection campaign at Camp Funston. If you've ever seen the picture, the most famous picture of the plague is an American Army hospital where there's hundreds and hundreds of beds, and there's just all of these people. That was at Camp Funston. And so once I realized that the kind of connection that, hey, this isn't the first time they've done this, that was the first time they'd masked the public. That was the first time. So the kind of the thesis of the investigation turned into, hey, this is like a serial scam that they've been running since the last century, where every generation or so we're going to have some kind of quote unquote pandemic that's going to require the government to buy a whole bunch of vaccines, and that they're going to force into people. Whether it was swine flu, whether it was avian flu, whether it was AIDS, whether it was the COVID, all of this it's like a pattern where you can see who's making the money and how they're faking the test. And so with like AIDS, I think part of the reason why I didn't fall for the COVID immediately is I'd read a book called Inventing the AIDS Virus by Dr. Peter Duesberg that had a foreword by Carrie Mullis, who invented the PCR test. And I'd read that, decades ago, and I realized that AIDS had been a scam, and they'd never really been able to isolate they'd never been able to isolate.
Have you ever seen Nick Petoskey's stuff? Have you ever seen Nick Petoskey?
I know, and the name isn't even familiar.
Again, someone who I've come across, who I've become friends with over time, who did a presentation for me on or from AIDS virus from start to finish, and it just a completely extraordinary story behind it all. I mean, what we're talking here is a manipulation of viruses and illnesses over a long period of time. because where you're starting, like Spanish flu in 1917, there was a couple of things. There was that sleep-in disorder that people got from about 1914, 1915 too. And if you go back in time, these same groups, the League of Nations,
Yes. Yeah.
Rockefellers, a lot of these guys are all funding people to go around and uh, collect as much information about disease and see what spreads. See what spreads. My investigation into the Manchurian plague went back to learning about in Manila. Dr. Strong, who represented the Americans at the international seminar, had been selected by the Rockefellers. So when they went to government, when they went to the ministers for health at the time, or whatever you call them, in America, they were told, "Oh, go and to the Rockefellers, and they'll make the decision." So already back then, you can see who's making the moves, and it's all about making people sick and making as many
It's
people
all
sick
about
as
making
possible.
money. It's all about, hey,
Same thing, eh?
we're going to make it look like that there's a pandemic, and then we're going to sell the population vaccines. The vaccines are going to make it worse, or the therapeutics. In the case of like in AIDS, it wasn't a vaccine; it was AZT, and so then the therapeutic is going to make it worse. We're going to
Haffkins
point.
prophylactic was one of the ones in the thing.
We're like it's a remdesivir with the COVID, AZT with AIDS. The cure is going to make it worse. We're going to point to that outcome and say, look, there's it's like it's mutating or it's getting worse. We're going to point to what the therapeutic does as if that's the evidence of the disease that we're trying to sell the public on, and then we're going to just transfer hundreds of billions of dollars out the back door. We're going to buy vaccines that we don't need. We're going to stockpile them at BARDA. So there's a group within the Pentagon that stockpiles vaccines, and so every scam, they're going to buy hundreds of millions or $1 billion worth of vaccines. They're going to stockpile them until they expire, and then they're going to stockpile them again. There's so many different scams like going on, simultaneously. There's been over $35 billion that the NIH has spent on AIDS research with absolutely nothing to show for it.
Oh, they got a lot of intelligence to show for it.
That's
they got
a lot of money. Like $35 billion is a lot of money. And so, I mean, my thesis is that, not only is government illegitimate, but government is essentially being run as a criminal enterprise out of Washington, D.C. and London and wherever. And so we're running government on the population that gives us the ability to control information. Because, I mean, if you take a look at like whether it's the COVID or AIDS, you've got a top-down hierarchical control of health information coming out of the WHO, the CDC, the NIH, the NIAID. And then because of government, that information is allowed to be pushed down to state health departments, state surgeon generals, county and city and town health departments. And so you're able to, take a bad policy or bad hospital protocols, and you're able to hierarchically push them down through government. And then you're able to, mandate certain hospital protocols, therapeutics that make it worse. And then you're able to, in the case of COVID, you're able to mandate a quote unquote vaccine that's really ought to be called an experimental gene therapy. And you're able to make people sick. And I think that was the goal. And so I think that they're eugenicists. And so what you're seeing with the output of the quote unquote vaccine that they forced on everybody is you're seeing sterility issues. You're seeing, if a lot of women that were pregnant when they took the quote unquote vaccine, it acted as an abortifacient, it induced a miscarriage or an abortion, and now you've got fertility issues.
They're still pushing it on them. They're still pushing it on pregnant women. It's unbelievable over here. I've heard it on a couple of occasions. Just made me gasp out loud. Just amazing. Something that was experimental, just continuously being used afterwards anyway. Unbelievable. Some of this is wild. And what you're talking about, the hierarchical structure, means Winston Smith's all the way down, burning the truth. As each time goes down, it gets more and more to the point where it's detached from what the objective is. The objective has one look, and what the information comes out looks. It looks like it's not going to cause any trouble at all. It's benign, but it's not. It's not. It's the worst type of thing. Benign policies that allow them to do whatever they want is what rules the world at the moment. It's not going to get any easier though. And one of the things you said, easier. Okay. So earlier on, I'm looking for some sort of conflict here. I'm coming. Here we go. This is my conflict. The idea of replacing this system is very tempting, isn't it? It's extremely tempting. And so at the moment, what we're being offered is various forms of technocracy. And that comes with a panopticon, a nice big digital panopticon that's run by one or two. Now, I've noticed in your work, of course, you're focusing on things like BlackRock, and you're focusing on corporate parts of the structures that make up the owners of that, or the controllers of that panopticon, though they offset their control to often Israeli military, CIA, who, it doesn't matter, intelligence agents who from things like Unit 8200 who are running these companies and going forward. What future can you see, and how will it differentiate from any other technocracy if there's always going to be a panopticon? And how do you have libertarianism come out within a technocratic system?
Well, first of all, just to kind of restate the thesis. So it's the banks on the top. They're creating money out of thin air, even though that's inflationary, even though that's stealing the value out of everybody else's money. And for those in your audience that aren't familiar with the term fractional reserve banking, when you go to a bank to get a mortgage or a car loan or a 50-year mortgage, the bank is not loaning you another depositor's money. What the bank does is the bank tickles the ivories on the keyboard and credits your account with digital dollars. They just come into existence as a ledger entry on the bank's keyboard. And then you spend the rest of your life paying back a loan that the bank created out of thin air. And if you don't make your payments, then they steal it. And now the bank owns real property, real estate, real, assets and real things. And so that system is inherently inflationary, and that system is inherently criminal. They're stealing they're engaged in they've created a monetary system that is inherently fraudulent and is inherently stealing the value out of everybody's money. Now, what does that produce? It produces phenomenal quote unquote profits. It's really theft. I don't like using the word profits, but it produces an amazing amount of money for the banks, which is why the bank is the biggest building in every city in the world. Like, if you think about it, like, how did banks get to be the biggest building in every city, on the planet? And the reason is because they're stealing it. And so if you're stealing the value out of the money, so the more money the banks create, you can think of money a little bit like an analogy I use is like a baseball card. And if I have the only, Babe Ruth rookie baseball card in the world, it's worth a whole bunch of money. If there's two of them, it's worth a little bit less. And if somebody finds like a case in a warehouse that nobody knew about and cracked it open, and now there's thousands and thousands, then the market for it collapses.
Big case.
And so that's how the value of kind of money works. And so if I have $1 and you have $1, dear listener, and we have the only $2 in the world, I have 50% of the world's wealth and you have 50% of the world's wealth, and a bank or a government comes along and creates two additional dollars through fractional reserve banking or through quantitative easing or a printing press or digital dollar creation, well, now all of a sudden the bank has stolen 50% of the world's wealth, and you and I have been reduced to 25% of the world's wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the main scam. Now, so how would you, the first thing they did is they bought up the media. So the media isn't going to tell the population what's really going on, except in these kind of these authentic voices on the self-directed internet, where people are seeing our pirate transmission right now. We're getting the truth out, through the self-directed internet to people that have discernment and can recognize who the authentic voices are and are paying attention and aren't being distracted by children's games played by adults or by sitcoms or whatever is the distraction of the day on the television. And so the real serious thing that's going on is that we are having systematically the value of the currency stolen from us, where the population is being made artificially poor in a kind of economic warfare against the population. So they don't want the population to have independent wealth. They don't want they want the population to be dependent upon the monopoly companies. And so what they're doing is they've been providing, they create these tickets out of thin air, and they provide unlimited capital to a handful of corporations to monopolize and consolidate their own interests. So they're creating the money out of thin air. They're giving it to certain companies. Those companies are buying up and consolidating their industries. And that's why you have the Fortune 100 and the Fortune 250 and the Fortune 500. A lot of times, not every single member of the Fortune 500 is a member of this cartel, but you can see and you can kind of tell who's trading together and who's putting stuff in the food supply to dumb down the population, and which companies are making harmful herbicides and pesticides that are being sprayed on the crops, and you can figure out who's kind of who. But that monopoly system, that creating the monopoly winners, they're being bought up, and the ownership is being managed by BlackRock, by Vanguard, by State Street, by other kind of equity players. And then the C-level executives, and on the media side of the house, the publishers, the editors, the producers, the reporters, they're being organized into front groups like the World Economic Forum, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group, where they're meeting on a regular basis in secure facilities around the world. They're being given their marching orders, especially on the media side, that we're going to have a scam like the COVID. Everybody's going to go along with it. These are what the talking points are going to be. If you're familiar with Event 201 was really to give the media the talking points. This is how we're going to message COVID.
And the interlocutor for the media at Event 201 was Matthew Harrington of Edelman PR. And Edelman PR
Yes.
own about 60% plus of nearly all media, marketing, promotion, publicists, everything you can imagine. Loads of different arms, loads of different organizations set up, of course, by Daniel J. Edelman, who was in psychological operations during the American side of World War II against Germany, and went on to actually do a deal with the Colonel, and I think they helped with the stealing of McDonald's. I can't remember. But then Richard Edelman took over and became one of the point men for Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum event, where they have the Edelman Trust Barometer, it's called, where they investigate where the trust is least and most, and always seem to give an award to Saudi Arabia for being a really good open country, which is a very bizarre little two-step. Go on, you want
So
to say something?
one of my theses is that the most powerful weapon in organized crime's arsenal is this control of perception. Can we control the information that society receives, whether it's on the COVID or on 9/11 or on how just and munificent Saudi Arabia is, or whatever it is? That is the most important weapon. Can they get you to believe that you're not a free and independent human being that just lives on this planet, but by virtue of where you were born, you're an American or an Englishman, and by virtue of where you're born, you now owe money to Washington D.C. or to London. And not only do you owe money, but it's your duty to pay the money.
Yeah, yeah.
It's good to pay the money. It makes you a better person. You're a bad person if you don't give the money. And so that really that is the most powerful weapon. We were talking earlier
powerful.
about like who gets censored. So the number one thing that gets censored is that government is illegitimate on its face. That's there's two things that they do not want the population to know, that you will never ever hear discussed on the monopoly media, or you will never hear discussed on the mainstream alternative media, okay, which is the controlled opposition, the quote unquote alternative media, which is really controlled opposition. The number one and number two thing that I want you to know is, number one, government is illegitimate on its face. It's impossible to have a legitimate government. The whole thing is immoral. The whole thing is illegitimate. It's illogical. It doesn't make any sense. And then the number two thing is that we don't really need government. That everything the government does would be done better, faster, and cheaper by the free market. That everything except redistribution, and which is immoral on its face. But everything the government does, mostly what the government does is provide services, whether that service is delivering the mail or armed protective services that they call the police, or dispute resolution that they call the courts, or running air traffic control, or running hospitals in the NIH in the UK, or whatever it is. All of these services would be better provided, better, faster, and cheaper by the free market. Those are the two things that are being purposefully hidden, purposefully censored, they're being demonetized, they're being deplatformed, they're being de-indexed, they're being, it's called freedom of speech without reach. It's being censored. It's like, that's the thing they do not want people to know, is that government is illegitimate and we really don't need it.
Yeah, spot on. And, I met you when you were talking there was multiple points where, and we'll go back around in a circle from what you started off there. During the Edge dinners and events, which were run by John Brockman's organization, which was really focused, like the idea of it came with a load of people who like the idea of information theory anyway, so believe in the exchange of information is just the perpetual motion of knowledge and activity and action. Nothing happens unless you put information in, and everything has an equal amount of information that comes back, from cellular level all of the way up to every other single different. And they were obsessed with this idea that if they then control all the ideas and control all of the debate, of course. And some of that was represented in the Edge courses. And of course, 2008, I did an article called Epstein and Musk, the Third Culture. And they did a joint conference or seminar of like 8, 9 to 12, 13 people who were all the top dogs in YouTube, Twitter, all of the boys are there, people like Jeff Bezos and Salah Kamanga of YouTube, Evan Williams, who was the head of Twitter, are there, Daniel Hillis and other people who were really genetic scientists. What can they be used for in the world? It's when they're surrounded by eugenicists and funded by eugenicists. What could a genetic scientist possibly be? used for. But the 6-part masterclass that year was headed by Sendil Malnathan and Richard Thaler, who was, of course, of the nudge units of the behavioral insight teams of how to manipulate people by using psychology without them knowing that they're being manipulated via the social media platforms that these guys were running. Elon Musk is, of course, there as well. This was all funded by Jeffrey Epstein. Same next year when Musk put on a joint edge SpaceX expose masterclass on synthetic genomics, transhumanism, and the step towards transhumanism. That was also funded by Epstein. Now, within the 2008 course, one of the 6-part masterclass that they taught on each day, one of them was the psychology of poverty. It was really about how, and Sendil Malnathan, I've said it a couple of times, he says at the beginning of it, and these are all recorded, so you can actually go and listen to them, you go watch them yourself. They got the full minutes of every single one. It's all on the archives as well, so you can read all the minutes of every single part of the class in detail, everybody who says everything. And I advise people to do, I think it was class 4, was the psychology of scarcity, they called it. And Sendil Malnathan says, hey, we don't like poverty. Poverty isn't something we want, but there's a lot of interest in psychology to be had there. And we live in just a perpetual them using the poverty against us, because obviously, the system you're talking about lends to what's the best mechanism for them to use. That what do we all have in common that one targeting mechanism can reach, or can and what is best when we want to use psychological warfare on these people? What state do they need to be in? It has to be impoverished. It has to be impoverished. But you said something there which I'm trying to struggle with now, because I came from a left-wing background. My dad was a steel worker he was a wire tester for bridges in the big Allied Steel and Wire metalworks. And I always grew up on the left. And the idea, like clause 4 of the Labour Party, when that was taken out, that kind of like the left was defeated. That was taken out under Tony Blair in 1999, I think. And it was basically, we'll always look to nationalize, etc. And that nationalization was kind of like the idea of we can keep redistributing wealth in some way. That was the idea. We can stop these rich fat cats taking everything. Now, I don't agree with that model that like everything is all or nothing. I believe in the world that there's always some form of give and take. And when you talk about the system, well, all of those big companies, all of those monopolies, all of those banks, they own a massive amount of property, and there's people homeless all over the place. And that can only be, there has to be a mechanism for redistribution of wealth under certain circumstances as a consequence of the system, surely.
I agree with that. And so the point that I would make is a lot of people, when you hear the term capitalism, some people think of a free market with private property, and some people think of the bourgeois oppressing the proletariat. Mm-hmm. And so we don't have free market capitalism. What we have is something called crony capitalism or cronyism. In economics, the technical term is cronyism or crony capitalism. And so the world has evolved in a way where it's technically an oligarchical kleptocracy. Okay, and an oligarchy is ruled by a few, a kleptocracy is ruled by thieves. And so what we have is an intergenerational organized crime system centered around banking and central banking that has stolen and monopolized the world. And that needs to be rolled back. But I've got some ideas about how to do that I don't want to talk about because I haven't fleshed them out, and I don't want to think. But I will say that you're right, that we've got to get that there needs to be a clawback, okay? And if you're not familiar with the term clawback, clawback is when there is a theft or when there is stealing, that there's a mechanism to go and get that back from the people that stole it. And so I agree with you 100%. But moving forward, we've got to eliminate the potential and the future potential of banks and corporations to steal money from the population, redistribute it to themselves, and then bring in a technocracy to control the population that has been robbed and impoverished in a kind of economic warfare against them. And the technique that was used to rob and impoverish the people is government. There would not be fractional reserve banking without government. There wouldn't have been a COVID scam without government and the ability to hierarchically control the information that the NIH and the health services received. There wouldn't have been trillions of dollars of unnecessary warfare, based on the lie of 9/11 without government. There wouldn't have been 9/11 without
Wait a
government.
minute. This 9/11, it was an inside job, you say?
I'm shocked. Shocked. I can tell you're shocked.
Shocked. It is shocking.
So we've got to get rid of government. And also, you don't want it. There's a karmic debt to supporting government. So like one of the things, I've got a new book coming out in a month or so called Voluntarism, How the Only Ism Fair for Everyone Leads to Harmony, Prosperity, and Good Karma for All. And the good karma piece of that is if you're advocating for government, whether you're advocating for left government or right government or Trump or Kamala or Keir Starmer or Nigel Farage, whoever it is, you're trying to impose your ruler on your friends, your neighbors, your colleagues. It's never going to turn out the way that you want it to turn out. It's always going to be worse, and then you're going to be to blame for it, versus kind of what voluntarists understand is the world is a self-organizing system that produces spontaneous order. Okay, you don't have to force anything on anybody. The world will, you won't have monopoly police. You'll have armed protective services companies that will compete to which one can keep your neighborhood the safest, and they will compete on who can deliver the most restitution when you get robbed. And they're not going to be arresting people for victimless crimes, smoking a plant or gambling or any of the things that make the police the actual criminals because they're using violence on peaceful people. You're going to get better outcomes from real freedom, and people are going to be wealthier, and you're going to have more harmony in society without government. And when I say you're going to have more harmony here in the United States, we fight at the school board level, okay, to control the curriculum of the entire school district, all the schools in the county. Okay, there's a knife fight, and if you lose in San Francisco, you get LGBTQT studies forced on your kids. If you lose in New York City, you might get critical race theory forced on your kids. If you lose in Dearborn, Michigan, you may get Islamic studies forced on your kids. And so that none of that we don't have to be fighting at the school board, because we would all, if it wasn't for government, we'd all be crazy wealthy and we'd be able to afford whatever kind of education that you want for your kid. Do you want self-directed learning? Do you want Montessori? Do you want Waldorf? Do you want act-on academies? Do you want vocational training? Do you want to, like whatever, like you can get exactly what you want without being forced into a system that you don't want. So that's the good, I guess that's the good news message of the Art of Liberty Foundation. That's the good news message of my work, is that I agree with you. We've got to claw it back. But when this system collapses, because they've stolen all the value out of the dollar, we have to make sure that we reboot on real freedom and free market money, and that no bank gets to create money out of thin air, and that they, because the first thing they're going to do is buy the government and the media right all and over again, and we're going to be the exact same spot. And so that's really what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to make sure that if this system collapses, or if we can get enough people to change it before it collapses, that we go towards real freedom, and real freedom is the thing that produces harmony and prosperity for society.
Now, one of the things I'm thinking there is, I'm thinking, okay, you've not everybody has the ability to accept a challenge of a difficult question, and I think you can accept a challenge of a difficult question. It's something I've been thinking about, because I spent a long time like marveling at the whole LGBTQI plus stuff. I spoke with lots of people during my time at TNT. I had like four guests a day on sometimes, and I had people who had surgery and regretted it. I had people who were trying to fight against the whole imposition by the state of a educational sort of a mass educational reform about sexuality and gender, which most people found as an imposition on their lives and their interaction with their own children. Now, on the other hand, I like someone who does like to weigh things up. And most of this is really about teenagers. And teenagers, as you and I was such a punk. It was obvious I was a punk very early on. No, you were a punk. It's very obvious, I bet, straight away that you won't go and accept a system. Hey?
I had a mohawk.
I had a mohawk too. I also had the individual like rancid spikes as well back in the day. Old ladies on buses used to touch my hair like this. It's okay if I touch your hair, so that you can see how it is. But I mean, we've always been people who are on the opposite of what is the mainstream, and I see the mainstream change, and it's changing synthetically. So that's understand, but it makes no difference. Teenagers are the most awkward, like of all of us, out of human beings through the teenage years. Teenagers want to do the opposite of whatever society tells them. So surely even an external attempt to normalize anything that's gone to a point where it's really extreme, it has a negative kickback at some point naturally. Like you talk about free markets and everything. Well, the mind is supposed to be a free market, and I think I can see the point that there's a nuance. They're not trying not to make it a free market. They're trying to impose their wishes upon us. But at the same time, the actual like how it and it comes out in reality is always much more human, I find, because most of the people I know who have got kids who consider themselves on the spectrum or whatnot, it might be a load of tosh to you and I, but it gives them some sort of like harness and anchor into how they're feeling about a very complicated world. Because a lot of the people who I think consider doing like changing their bodies back when I was kid would have been like, called butch lesbians and stuff like this, and there's a lot of that. There's a lot of just human nature. It was always the same, and I was always accepting of people, and people are always odd. So I find I do think that it's been created into, it's so emotive that it allowed a lot of controlled opposition to create a debate where they pushed it upon everybody all of the time. So I don't know. I'm trying to understand. In a sense, it's like how you claw back it also means we need to change the way we perceive a system and how we interact with the system. If there has to be a method for some form of redistribution of the stolen wealth and the kleptocracy, that's the same ideologically speaking, isn't it?
So I think there's a couple of different. I was sensing a couple of different questions. I think one of which was around the artificiality of LBGQT and about how kids are being steered into what I would argue is something called cultural debasement. And the short answer to that part of the question is, if this is a slavery system, it's a tax slavery system. And so if you add up in the United States, if you add up all of the taxes, the overt taxes, which is we call the 1040, and what you pay to the federal government and income tax, that's probably somewhere between 25 and 36%, depending on what tax bracket you're in. But in the United States, we also have a gazillion hidden taxes. And so every time you get a gallon of gasoline, every time you pay your cell phone bill, every time you pay your cable television bill, every time you get an airline ticket. I went to London a couple of years ago. I tell this story a lot. The ticket was $1,200. The taxes and the landing fees and the COVID fee and everything like that was $800. And the actual ticket was $400. And so a lot of people just don't realize how much they're paying, every time you get a beer, if you're a smoker, every time you buy a cigarette or a cigar, if you're like, it's endless here in the United States. In Europe, I know you have the VAT, which is even worse because it's hard to even calculate because there's so many different, times they're hitting all of the different inputs at different rates and everything. And then you have the inflation tax, which is we're stealing the value out of the dollars that you both earn and you save. And a lot of people don't understand this. Your dollar or your pound, or whatever, your yen or Deutschmark, whatever it is, it should be buying more and more and more every single year as innovations and productivity improvements reduce the cost of producing and distributing the luxuries and the necessities of life. But instead of your dollar buying more and more and everybody getting wealthier and wealthier, the dollars and the yen and the Deutschmarks and the pounds are losing value every single year, and we're getting artificially poorer and poorer and poorer. And so that is producing a slavery. And if you add up the overt taxes, the covert taxes, and inflation, it's over 50% of the average person's income in the United States is going out the back door of taxes. And we haven't even hit the estate tax yet. And we haven't even hit another, bunch of other, tax categories. But that is slavery. That is the same as if they made the population work every single day in January, February, March, April, May, June, okay, for the government, and you didn't see any of it. And then they're handing it out the back door on vaccines that you don't need to get, or weapon systems that we don't need to fight wars based on lies and manufactured intelligence. This is being stolen kind of over, or being handed to banks in bailouts and stimulus, or being handed to the airlines to go along with the COVID, or whatever, or agricultural subsidies for ethanol, or whatever it is. We're being robbed. And so if you're running slaves, and that's what it is, and that's the stone cold truth of it is it's a tax slavery system, and we've got a group of slaves, some of whom live real nice. Like you can make millions and millions of dollars, or even billions of dollars in the system, but you can't say no. And the difference between a free man and a slave is that a free man can say no. And that's the stone cold truth of the situation. So if you're running slavery on a society, you don't want the slaves to be moral and upright. You want them to be drunk and drugged and have psychological issues. And so I think that part of the system is part of its cultural debasement. So we're going to have, 50 different television shows on tattoos to get people to, tattoo themselves and everything. And I don't know if it was just amazing. There was like almost nobody had tattoos. And then probably 30-40% of society had tattoos. And whether you have a tattoo or not, I'm not saying that something negative about tattoos. What I'm saying is that was brought in with television shows that promoted, and you get to sit down and you get to tell your story of why you get the tattoo, and they popularized things into the culture, whether that's tattoos or LBGQT or you name it. There's
some of that has crossovers as well.
It has crossovers, and again, everything goes back to eugenics. And so with the transgenderism, in my solving COVID, the COVID-19 eugenics vaccine drug scam timeline, I actually break down how a memo from the World Population Council to the head of Planned Parenthood, where they broke down, like, we'll put sterilants in the water, we'll popularize homosexuality. And so there was they had a whole list of kind of foundational changes to society to promote homosexuality. And so when you see that come true, so there's a plan. Some of the wealthiest people in the world have a plan to put chemicals into the food system and the water system, and to promote homosexuality on television to reduce the population and to reduce, to depopulate the planet. And when that comes true, we're all scratching our heads going, that's the weirdest thing. How did that happen? And so whether it's atrazine, so the herbicide atrazine, which is a gender bender, whether it's the BPA and the BPS in the cash register receipts and the can linings, and you take a look at, especially Netflix. You talked about the background of Edelman Worldwide. The background of Netflix is that's the Bernays family. And the CEO and the founder of Netflix, his middle name is Bernays, and Edward Bernays was the founder of propaganda. He was a propagandist for the Rockefellers.
Good man, if you ask me. A very good man, upstanding citizen.
He tricked women into smoking torches of freedom. He gave the world bacon and eggs. Yeah. So Netflix is popularizing everything from the sexualizing of children to transgenderism to there's gay characters in every single television show. Again, so if you go to the COVID-19 vaccine drug scam timeline, you can actually see the memo that would describe the exact thing that we're seeing today in the culture, being kicked around by, again, some of the wealthiest people on the planet. And then a lot of those fortunes of the eugenicists, especially the Rockefeller and the Carnegie fortune, those fortunes were left to foundations that continue the work of eugenics today.
Yeah, so like the Wellcome
Foundation was neck deep in the COVID. The Rockefeller Foundation had a plan to get vaccines from airplanes into arms. The Rockefeller Foundation, and not just the Rockefeller Foundation, but John Hopkins.
And the Wellcome Trust. I've done a lot of work on the Wellcome Trust, exactly. Which, of course, George Wellcome was exactly from the same thing. I mean, I think there's a second biggest organization who does what? I'm not quite sure what these guys even are, what they consider. They were what a lot of the officials used as an arm, a conduit, so they didn't have to take accountability or responsibility for COVID and actions during COVID. Edward C. Holmes was the first person to transcribe COVID into English and was based in Fudan University when they originally had the outbreak. You got Jeremy Farrar, extremely influential man who's now taken his seat at the World Health Organization's top table, but has worked for them all. Every single person that you will name that's related to this, Jeremy Farrar has had a bit of the table here and a bit of a table there. Richard Sykes, Neil Ferguson, the boys who know how to run roughshod over all of the safety measures that should be in place to protect us from people exactly like them. And they all come from these sort of organizations, these big, they're proper, they do more than just, I see these guys much more as interlocutors between the people who want to make money and the people who want everything to be unaccountable, you know?
Well, I think what I think is that the people that are creating the money out of thin air and that are controlling the media, there has to be a talent development program. And so this is the Rhodes scholarships on kind of the
Maybe.
you know the British Anglo-American Empire side. This is the World Economics Forum's Young Global Leaders program.
That's my expertise. I'm the number one expert in the history of the World Economic Forum, the global Young Global Leaders program. Not only that, the Forum for Young Global Leaders. We're going back to Kissinger's International Seminar, which was, of course, made out of a CIA-funded program. And Klaus Schwab himself went through and was given mentorship through that course of Herman Kahn, the main guy behind nuclear theory from the Hudson Institute, and John Kenneth Galbraith, one of the biggest, most important statesmen in history, go back and create the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leader program, which really was an extension again of CIA programs. I just released an article called Thiel and Schwab. It's about Klaus Thiel and Klaus Schwab both working on the South African nuclear apartheid era nuclear program at the same time between 1967 onwards during an unknown genocide which no one really recognizes, where they sent black people with no protection down a uranium mine to ingest uranium, take it home to their families, and everybody died, basically. Everybody would die. It's a horror story, absolute horror story. But I discovered in 1965 and 1966, Klaus Schwab had been welcomed in, of course, through Kissinger's International Seminar, and had gone to UC Berkeley, to the center of the American nuclear physics programs during 1966, and spent 6 weeks there just while he's doing the Kissinger's International Seminar, and just before he's going to go back and be given a position in his father's old Nazi model company, Escher Weiss, which he'll merge and help the nuclear apartheid regime of South Africa become. I mean, it's just a crazy story, but when you actually look it all through, it's all different forms of mentorship programs, leadership programs. That's how they do it. They make sure every single, even Edge itself, that was kind of a leadership program. Jeffrey Epstein himself was a leadership guy. He was all about looking after the Democratic Party leadership and the technocracy, interlocutor really between what was a Republican-leaning intelligence-led outfit who were trying to control and make sure that the Democratic Party stayed in line, especially, and they put their own leaders in the power in the Democratic Party, especially since JFK. From that point on, the Democratic Party had been definitely controlled by a Republican-leaning intelligence infrastructure through people like George H.W. Bush, etc., who, of course, and then Clinton, who is the one who brings in Epstein, who then focuses in on potential young leaders. It's all really easy to trace. So why don't people trace it? Can you tell me?
Because they're distracted and they're deceived. And it's funny because I have to bring this up, so I've got to credit you. I like it just dawned on me. So when I wrote the solving COVID, the COVID-19 eugenics vaccine drug scam timeline, I actually leaned on some of your work into the founding of the World Economic Forum and how Klaus Schwab came across with Galbraith and with Kahn, and they helped him gather collect what became the World Economic Forum. Back then it was the Business Roundtable or whatever
European Management Forum. It was
the European Management Forum. Now this is interesting. This is where you're, because this because I know we don't have a lot of time and we wanted to talk about the censorship, and so when we posted the solving COVID, the COVID-19 eugenics vaccine drug scam timeline on Substack, We published it as an article on Substack. Several months later, I was like looking through the article and I realized somebody's gone in and edited out certain aspects of the article. And I went and I got the original and I go and I look into it. And what the one that really stood out, the thing that they didn't want to know, and was they took out a screenshot I had of the Harvard Crimson article about
Humphrey
the
Dorman's
CIA funding of Henry Kissinger's International Symposium. And they took out, that's one of the things that got censored off of Substack. So then we had to repost another article on it and then include a link to the PDF in case it happened again. But that's one of the things that got censored out of the Substack version of our article, was your research into who was behind the WEF and how it's essentially an outgrowth of the Council on Foreign Relations. And I don't know if you knew that this was going on, but in the 1980s, there was a group called the Fund to Restore an Educated Electorate, and they began publishing a chart showing the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and the Bilderberg Group, and their connections to every power center in the United States. I have a poster of it at artofliberty.org/white-rose, and it's one of the posters.
Send it to me.
Oh yeah. And so it goes back. And so what happened is the Council on Foreign Relations, that poster and that visualization is so striking because you can actually see every power center in the United States, the head of the FBI, the CIA, the presidency, the vice presidency, every major cabinet position, every major bank. So it's the nexus of the CFR is the nexus of the intelligence communities, the government, the banks, major universities, things like that, going back decades through Republican and Democrat administrations. Every major power position has been held by somebody within at least one of those organizations, frequently two or three. So the person will be a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and an attendee of the Bilderberg meetings, going back decades through Republican, Democrat. And this visualization spread virally through the United States. And so what I think happened is they realized that people were onto the CFR. And so I think the WEF is they figured out the CFR and the Trilateral Commission, and they're figuring out how we're organizing the C-level executives.
I can tell you the reformation period of that. I would say between 1967, the very last moment of Kissinger's international seminar, and the opening of the German Marshall Fund at Harvard, that kind of took a different route of the same sort of leadership programs, but from a distance. There was a moment where there was a reset in 1967 where they said, we're going to say everything out loud. We're going to say the CIA was involved with all of it. And then we're going to create this new world order of non-governmental organizations, non-governmental development organizations, other organizations that are detached from state, like, because, I mean, everybody knows things like USAID, etc. And even in comments during the 80s, you can see them say, well, this is just an offshoot of the CIA, really. I mean, we all know what this is. But during that period, between that time, there became a point where you should look at. The fourth of the Schwab series was Guido Goldman and the German Marshall Fund. Guido Goldman was the son of Nahum Goldman, who was one of the founding fathers of modern state of Israel and was one of the leaders of all the big Zionist organizations back in the past. Of course, 1945, UN gave him an office within the buildings of the UN to lobby for a state of Israel from the off. And Guido Goldman would eventually be Henry Kissinger's best friend and flatmate. They shared flats everywhere. Guido Goldman used to bring lunch to the White House to Kissinger, organized his 50th birthday party that happened just after Watergate and stuff. There's some hilarious. It almost looks like an Odd Couple sort of relationship that would be a brilliant comedy skit. But during that time, there's this reformation of the CFR. I think if you look at that Guido Goldman article, have a look at the first day of the opening of the German Marshall Fund. Every single person who's standing there, from David Rockefeller all the way across the board, every single one of them is a member of the CFR. Every single one of them.
The other thing the WEF gave them, the one thing that I just wanted to add to what you said, is it internationalized something that was essentially a national program within the United States. The Trilateral Commission was international, but it was smaller. It was more kind of inclusive. And so they took the CFR model and they globalized it for the WEF.
There's an amazing picture on the first day of the opening ceremony where Willy Brandt, the German prime minister, who's got I can't remember what they called him. He was the chancellor. He was the such a weird history. He's not even really German in a sense, and it looks like an intelligence construct. And he gives a load of money to Harvard to create the German Marshall Fund, which loads of people know afterwards is just another an arm, an unaccountable arm of the CIA. He gives a load of money from Germany for them to do activities in Eastern Europe on German behalf. And that is like the way that they get funding. The CIA get funded from other governments to do protection work and to create this racket of non-governmental organizations. And I think it's, what we're seeing there is America, we've decided what we want the world to look like. We've started doing coups. Now let's industrialize it in every way possible. Let's get our tentacles everywhere. And the way for that was one step up from what had been before of just the CIA doing it surreptitiously. But they needed a shop front. They needed a face that people can go to and say, oh, I need help in developing this or developing this in this country, which would be beneficial to you too. And that was all from about 1967 and that reset onwards. And that reset was highly linked to the creation of Israel, the 6 Day War and the creation, the expansion, not the creation, the expansion of Israel during that period. I mean, that's when Israel, an American audience went from being fairly pro-Palestinian and finding it horrific what was going on to suddenly being behind Israel and it being really and the American deep state saying we are definitely fully behind Israel. Even most of the members of the CIA, people like Kermit Roosevelt, Virginia Gildersleeves, other people like that, Dorothy Thompson, they were very they were anti-Zionists and they were constantly actually pushing out this is the wrong way to go. But 1967, everything changed. And I think that's the point when the CFR became really like I suppose it's like a corporate directorship sort of role within every single part, every facet of this panopticon.
So I agree with everything that you just said. And I think that, let's talk about the censorship because I know we're short on time. Yes. And let's talk about what brought us together.
Most definitely, because I mean that is something that's very, very, very super strange. I just to run down for people really quickly. For people who know and don't know, I've been in a 6-year battle since first releasing the Younkerman articles with Nicole Younkerman, a previous associate of Jeffrey Epstein and Peter Thiel and now Elon Musk, etc. She's got her fingers in all the pies. Her current legal advisor was previously the legal advisor to Lord Jacob Rothschild. Just before, he went from Lord Jacob Rothschild over to her. She's also married to Count Bracetti Peretti, one of the richest and most powerful men in Italy, head of the API oil family, and there's been a censorship battle, and she's had roughly about 20 something plus 25 plus pieces of my work and other people's work that I can count so far taken offline through interim court injunctions, which are meant to lead to a defamation claim in court. But she's used an interim injunction 5, maybe 6 times. I think there's a new one out now, but 5 times against me without ever taking me to court for defamation, because she wouldn't be able to do it anyway. And I've been trying to make sure that I can garner as much evidence for this, because I am going in legal battle against her. I've put in a letter before action and told her that I'm going to sue her for the 6 years of censorship, and I explained the details of all my allegations to the company. I have to say, for a woman whose baby was christened in the Vatican, a week later, the Vatican got in contact with me and asked me to come to Rome. Just saying that. So, which is is like a weird experience. It could be unrelated. It could be related to the stuff I do on Zionism and Gaza, especially some of my work on that. It might be the reason why a certain bishop wants to speak to me. But still, they're very powerful people in Italy. She has used every legal mechanism to censor me. And recently, Substack, I applied to Substack for all of the information. That I have a right to reply, so I needed to know all the information. They sent me everything. I'm really happy with Substack in that sense, even though I'm pissed off that they still took the article down and they hadn't actually checked, dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. You know, they'd left out a load of things. But I'm really happy with how they actually went through a process with me. To give me an opportunity to be heard, and the stuff got reinstated. The actual 4 posts got reinstated, but during that period, they sent me a list of people who Michael Oakes had sent them a PDF showing different supposed defamation and DMCA claims against various people. And that got given to me. So I suddenly knew there are more people than me that Nicole Youngkerman is targeting. And one of them, sir, is you. Why would Nicole Youngkerman be targeting you?
It's funny. So I have not investigated her directly, but we have something. So the Art of Liberty Foundation publishes something called the Daily News from the Art of Liberty Foundation on Substack. And so we have a variety of Substacks, and one of which we're curating the best of the alternative media. And so we frequently syndicate your work and the work of other, what we believe to be authentic voices and important articles and things like that. And so it's a way of targeting you indirectly through me. But what I wanted to throw in is this is kind of what I was talking about earlier, that the most powerful weapon is this control of perception. And, one way is to control the airwaves of the monopoly media so that you're able to broadcast out Netflix cuties, or you're able to control the information that society receives overtly through what you're broadcasting at society, where you're controlling the narratives in Hollywood by paying off the directors and the producers and the thing. But the other aspect of that is the ability to censor information, whether that information is somebody goes into our Substack and deletes out aspects of our investigation into the COVID, or whether that is to wage lawfare on investigative journalists like yourself to have that material taken down. This is what I'm talking about. This is the most powerful weapon in the world, and this is what the CIA has been doing since it came out in 1976 in the Church Committee hearings, where it came out that they had hundreds and hundreds of reporters and editors, on the payroll, and that they were using those reporters and editors to put stuff into the information food chain or to censor information on the editorial level. And so this is an example of that, and I wanted to reinforce that and just kind of, wrap it all up in a bow to point out that this is one, we got brought together by one aspect of this program to control the information that society receives, whether they do it through lawfare, whether they do it through owning the editor of a thing, whether they do it being able to go into the back door of Substack and delete out aspects of our article. This organized crime system is controlling the information society receives so they can be tax farmed, robbed, and controlled by government.
Totally. And I just want to say one more thing that connects those things as well. I comes up in my brain quite a bit, but it was 1971 that the New York Times was being sued by the State Department. They were in a battle the State Department had been censored by them. They were not allowed to report certain information connected to Vietnam War. And Max Frankel, who became one of the editors at the Times, was called up to these hearings and gave evidence about how important it is to have a free press, how the decisions on who knows what truth is everything about freedom, is if you do not know, if you only know part of the truth, you do not have freedom. Freedom is knowing everything and having your own choice to make the decisions yourself with your own cognitive ability and with all of the context to everything, however horrible, however silly, however mischievous it may be, however bad it is for someone who's really powerful and famous, or rich or wealthy or influential. And Max Frankel said all of these things. And a year later, he became part of the German Marshall Fund. And won a Pulitzer Prize. Nice. It's nice. He says, we need freedom. We need freedom. We need freedom. And then the CIA bought him, gave him a massive prize. In his book, My Time with the Times and My Time at the Times, or something like that it's called, Max Frankel said he really deeply regretted getting involved with the German Marshall Fund. But the German Marshall Fund was very appropriate for him because I think he had lots of influential friends in the field, and the ones who are put out to speak about it out like they're heroes out on the mainstream, well, they're only out there because they're not the real heroes. The real heroes are censored. You don't hear who they are. Some of the best people in history, we know all of these big names, but I bet you some of the most important people in history are nameless people who are akin to you and I, battling grunts, punk grunts, Mohican bearing punk grunts out there on the front lines. So, man, I've had such a good conversation. It's been so like there's so many angles we could go, and I think we're going to have another conversation at some point. I'm open to having any type of discussion, even if you just want to have a chit chat sometime about how to solve these different things. I'd love to do that. Can you tell people where they can go to find your work and just give them a little bit of a final thought?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. I would love to have another conversation. We're definitely going to have another conversation. This has been fantastic. And thank you for what you do. I'm Etienne de la Boetie². My organization is the Art of Liberty Foundation. We're a startup public policy organization where we want to have a voluntarist think tank where kind of our two tenets are, number one, that government is always illegitimate. It's impossible to have a legitimate government. And then the other focus of our research is that the government is being run as a criminal enterprise, that you can track the money, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars being, going out the back door to very identifiable, the usual suspects. We're exposing the fraud of fractional reserve banking and how the monopoly media system and monopoly academia system works. We're at artofliberty.org. Most of my writings are available for free at artofliberty.substack.com. That's where you can get the Solving COVID, the COVID-19 eugenics vaccine drug scam timeline that I mentioned on a couple of different occasions during the conversation. And you can get my book, Government, the Biggest Scam in History, Exposed, at government-scam.com. And you can get my new book, To See the Cage is to Leave It, 25 Techniques the Few Use to Control the Many, at seethecage.com.
Excellent. Brilliant. And this being the NEWSPASTE Podcast, me, your host, Johnny Vedmore. And as I always say at the end, bye.